is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. Last week, I had my good friend Alex Mamula-Zarlingo on, and we talked about the NFL wildcard matchups, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. And we're also going to be talking about the college football playoff. The championship game is almost here. We have the final two teams, and we're going to go over all of that today. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. Also, my new and second YouTube channel is up and running, Renewed Hearts with Dominic Lako. We talk about scripture, we talk about gospel, we talk about Jesus. I would really appreciate all of you if you would subscribe and like to that channel. I believe that channel is going to change lives. At least I hope it does. And by the grace of God, I believe it will. I really hope it does. Praise God for that. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, like I said, we're going to be talking about the college football playoff, and we're going to be talking about some of the NFL wildcard matchups already that happened. Now, obviously, I'm recording this on a Monday, so this drops Tuesday morning. So, obviously, I will miss the Vikings and Rams game. Winner of that game is going to play Detroit. No, winner of that game is going to play the Eagles in the divisional round. So, for sake of argument later when we talk about it, because I think the Rams are going to beat the Vikings, we'll say the Rams are moving on. And vice versa, it really doesn't matter. We're just going to go over them briefly, but we're first going to start in the college football playoff. So we're going to go over the Capital One Orange Bowl first between the 6th-seeded Penn State Nittany Lions and the 7th-seeded Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So my predictions for this game, I thought Penn State was the more well-rounded team compared to Notre Dame. I thought the way they were playing indicated that Penn State was finally getting over the hump when it comes to at least the narrative when it comes to James Franklin in big games. I thought they were going to get over the hump with this. Now, my hesitation was the talent that they've played up to this point. Obviously, they played SMU and they played Boise State. Notre Dame's a different animal, even though a lot of people weren't as high on Notre Dame as they are now, obviously. People weren't high on Notre Dame, mainly because they had a paper-soft schedule. They lost to NIU earlier in the year. But Notre Dame is just a different level of brand and a different level of team compared to SMU and Boise State. So I knew it had to be a good game between Penn State and Notre Dame. I knew it was. I did end up predicting Penn State would win this game because I thought they were more well-rounded. I was mistaken. Notre Dame beats Penn State 27-24 on a game-winning field goal within the final seconds of that game. Watching that game, what's my biggest takeaway of it? Well, the Notre Dame defense is for real. Riley Leonard, he's really good. Riley Leonard's really good. So is their Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love is an absolute stud. And another takeaway for Penn State. Penn State has NFL guys all over the place, but yet Drew Aller, I think this is the biggest telling of how that game went for Penn State. Drew Aller did not have a single completion to any of his wide receivers. His best target was Tyler Warren. Now, granted, he's the Mackey Award winner for the best tight end in college football. But the fact that Drew Aller, didn't hit a single receiver throughout the entirety of the game, and it was still a 27-24 final game, and Drew Aller, with a chance to drive his team down the field, ended up throwing an interception late, and that's what ultimately led Notre Dame to get into field goal position and kick the game-winning field goal. I've been harsh on Drew Aller. I have. I don't necessarily think he's the greatest quarterback. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. But it's just something. It's always something with Penn State. There's always one thing that just seems off. I don't know necessarily if James Franklin is ever going to get over that hump. I'll say it to this day. I think James Franklin's best chance was when he had Trace McSorley at quarterback and Saquon Barkley at running back. That offense was amazing back then. I believe it was 2017 where they lost the Rose Bowl to USC on a final game-winning field goal by the Trojans. But that's the last Penn State team I can remember legitimately that can be considered possibly better than most of the national title, better than most of the teams that were in the college football playoff at that point in time. But I got to hand it to Notre Dame. I didn't think they would get this far. I believe I picked them to win against Indiana, and I predicted them to beat Georgia. But I thought the train would have ended there. I thought Penn State, they were just overall too well-rounded for Notre Dame to handle. But I was mistaken. And Georgia, realistically, if they had Carson back, maybe they'd probably make it a game. But the SEC dominance is coming to a close, and I couldn't be happier about that. So Notre Dame moves on to the national championship game, the first time since 2012, where they lost to Alabama in that national title game. Everybody remembers that game fairly well. But Notre Dame takes down Penn State in the Orange Bowl 27-24. All right, now let's move into the other game, which was absolute cinema, the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic between Ohio State and Texas. Now, before this game, last week when me and Alex were talking about this, I thought Texas was going to get rolled in this game. I thought Texas was going to get the brakes beat off them just because I don't think Texas is a bad team. I didn't at all. I thought they would be a legitimate contender for the national title, and they were this year. My biggest issue came when Arizona State took them to 2 overtimes. Arizona State is not the same class as Ohio State. They're not even close. If Ohio State had to play Arizona State, that game probably would have been over by halftime. That's how good Ohio State has been playing. And realistically, that's how all Ohio State games have went so far up in this college football playoff. You know, a 30-point win against Tennessee, a 20-point win against Oregon. You know, like, Ohio State was just a buzzsaw to these teams. But I will give Texas credit. They showed up for this game, and they damn near had it within their grasp. They should have won. Realistically, this game probably should have went to overtime, or Texas should have won this game. There are multiple reasons that Texas should have won this game, but there were 2 plays in this entire game that influenced why Ohio State was able to win 28-14, and Ohio State didn't necessarily play well. They didn't. Ohio State's, you know, they went up 7-0 really early, but after that, other than the plays I'm about to show you, Texas really had their number all day. Texas played better than I thought they would have against Ohio State, but there are 2 plays that influenced this entire game. First one is this one right before halftime. Everybody knows what it is, but I'm going to play it anyway, and this really influenced the rest of the game.
Howard, how aggressive will they be in the final seconds? Henderson can make a house call from anywhere. And look out! He just might do it! Travian Henderson gets momentum back for Ohio State. 75 yards.
How you allow... Now, this was right before the half. Texas finally got something going on offense. They finally scored to tie it 7-7. And a 75-yard screen pass of all things right before the half puts Ohio State back on top. So that's the first play that really influenced this game because all the momentum was shifting towards Texas at that point. So, but it's okay. Defensive breakdowns happen. So now we're going to fast forward to 3 minutes and 21 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Ohio State's up 21-14. Now, for context, we all saw it. Texas was gifted 2 pass interference calls in the red zone and on the goal line where they were within a yard of tying the game with a little over 3 minutes left in this game. But this play call right here, I knew right then and there Texas lost the game from right here.
Pitch on the edge. Strung out. Drop for a loss. Huge play.
It is 2nd and goal from the 1 yard line. 2nd and goal from the 1 yard line. You need 1 yard to tie the Ohio State Buckeyes. You need 1 yard. And you run a pitch to the left. Ohio State's defense, I've been critical of Ohio State at points in this season, but this defense is unreal. I've been saying that for probably the better part of 3 months now, that Ohio State's defense with Jack Sawyer and Caleb Downs and all them boys, they're so legit. It's scary. When you're Steve Sarkisian, you have Arch Manning on the sidelines. Arch Manning converted a 4th and 1 earlier in the game and took it 16 yards. Like, he didn't just get the yard, he got more. He got way more. Why on earth, when you are 2nd and goal, going into tie and possibly send the game to overtime? Because at this point, the Texas defense, they gave up a score, but all the momentum is now picking back up to the Texas side. And realistically, I thought Texas would have had a chance to win this game if they put a touchdown on the board on this possession. But the fact of the matter is that you run a pitch play on this Ohio State defense. Ohio State's defense, not only is it hard to run on them in the middle, at least in these playoffs, they have some of the best speed in the entire college football sport. All their players, they all can run. They all have speed. They all are so athletic. You are not running east to west on this defense. You can't. You have to go north. Literally straight on. That's what Texas should have done. And I was on record last week saying that if Texas wanted to win, they had to put in Arch Manning over Quinn Ewers. I might have to bite the bullet on that one just because Quinn Ewers played phenomenal in this game. He did, except the last possession where he threw an interception, but that was after the strip fumble, return for a touchdown. Ohio State basically won the game right then and there. But Quinn Ewers played remarkable in this game up until the last 2 minutes. He played remarkable. But in a situation like this, when you saw what Arch Manning did earlier in the game, he's a big, strong kid, fast, athletic. He would have gotten that 1 yard. I know it's hard to say from an outsider's perspective, and since the game's over, woulda, shoulda, coulda. But the way Arch Manning runs the football, and you need 1 yard. You did it earlier in the game where Arch Manning called his own number and ended up getting a 16-yard run out of it rather than just picking up the 1 yard they needed on 4th down. Why on 2nd and goal? First of all, a pitch play is absolutely asinine of a play call on a 2nd and goal from the 1 yard line. And then second, why not put Arch Manning in to try? Like, as hard as it is to run up the middle on the Ohio State defense, as hard as it is, I believe Arch Manning would have had the best chance to go straight. Because you can't run east-west on the Ohio State defense. You can't. So those two plays really influenced this game. Ohio State wins 28-14. And now the college football playoff national championship is set. It is set. We have reached the end of the 12-team playoff. Live on January 20th, we have the 8th-seeded Ohio State Buckeyes taking on the 7th-seeded Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, as of today, I'm looking at this on ESPN. Ohio State's favored by 8.5. And I'm here to tell you, I don't like this number. I don't. A lot of money's going to be put on Notre Dame to cover. I don't have a good feeling about this, but I will say I think Notre Dame has the tools to beat Ohio State. I watch the Notre Dame defense. That Notre Dame defense is pretty close to the level of the Texas defense. It's pretty close. It's not entirely the same, but in regards of talent and the way they play and how physical they play, I will say Notre Dame on defense has all the tools they need to keep Ohio State's offense in check. Keep it in check. Not fully stop it, but they can definitely keep the Ohio State offense in check. I worry about the Notre Dame offense. I worry about it because Riley Leonard, as much as he's had a great year, I think Quinn Ewers is better, and Quinn Ewers played out of his mind for 90% of that game against Ohio State, and they still lost. I think it's going to take a perfect game from Riley Leonard to win this game. And I will say the one positive aspect for Riley Leonard compared to what Ohio State played the week before against Quinn Ewers is the fact that Riley Leonard is a runner. Riley Leonard is a good runner. Between Riley Leonard, the receiving core is not bad. I don't mind the receiving core and Jeremiah Love and a solid offensive line. I think Notre Dame, I think they have a puncher's chance. I do. But when it comes to just the sheer amount of talent Ohio State has, I'm going to pick the Buckeyes. I think 8.5 is a little much. I think it's a little much. I mean, yeah, I guess you can look at it. The week before, I think Ohio State was favored by 6 against Texas. And realistically, that game should have just been an overtime game eventually, but that's neither here nor there. But Ohio State opening up as an 8.5-point favorite against Notre Dame, I don't like that number too much. But just because of the sheer firepower Ohio State has and the way their defense is playing with Jack Sawyer right now, I don't see anybody stopping Ohio State now. As much, I think Penn State and Texas were, I said weeks ago that Texas and Penn State had a better shot than Notre Dame. But the way Penn State played after the fact, now I don't believe it so much, but Texas had Ohio State on the ropes and they let it slip away. Last chance to stop the Buckeyes is Notre Dame, and realistically, I don't think Notre Dame's going to hold up against Ohio State. So I'm going to take the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think it's going to be a classic. And what a great way to end the college football season. I think Ohio State wins 28-24 and will be the first 12-team playoff national champions. All right, now let's transition to the NFL. Well, first, one college football story I did want to talk about. I thought it was kind of funny. So everybody knows how much of a big Miami Hurricanes fan I am. Everybody knows how hyped I was for Cam Ward to come to Miami. Now Cam Ward he was a Heisman Trophy finalist, set Miami Hurricane records in passing touchdowns, and really overall just had one of the best seasons a Hurricanes quarterback has ever had. And yet it still wasn't enough to get into the college football playoff. How well they would have done, I don't know, just because our defense was so poor and terrible. But again, I was very critical of how Miami's quarterback situation would be after Cam Ward would be leaving for the draft. And I knew for a fact that, and I said it weeks ago, that if you walked Emory Williams out against Notre Dame, the possible national champions in a week's time, if you walk Emory Williams out against Notre Dame, it would be a long, long season for the Hurricanes. Well, that changed this past weekend when Carson Beck, former quarterback at Georgia, committed to the University of Miami. And I can't think of a bigger way a college athlete has given a certain program the middle finger. Carson Beck, as we all know, played for Georgia, has been part of so many great teams that the Georgia Bulldogs have fielded over the past 2 years. Obviously, Beck was backing up Stetson Bennett when he was at Georgia, winning the national title over TCU in that bloodbath of a game. But Carson Beck had season-ending surgery after the SEC title game and was unavailable for the college football playoff, which ultimately led to Georgia losing to Notre Dame 23-10. Carson Beck originally put his name in for the NFL draft. Originally. But, it's kind of like how Cam Ward did it last year. He originally put his name in for the NFL draft, but a lot of scouts, probably some family, decide no, I think going back to college for one more year would do him some good. Now Cam Ward is looked at as a top 5 draft pick, and he will be a top 5 draft pick in this year's NFL draft. That's because he stayed one more year and lit it up at Miami. Well, Carson Beck, similar situation. He put his name in the draft and then recanted and basically said, bye, Georgia. Basically gave them the middle finger. Basically gave Kirby Smart and the entire program a middle finger on the way out. He didn't even go back to Georgia. He went to the University of Miami. Now, I know his girlfriend goes there. Like, everybody knows that. And, I think he wants to play in the NFL. I think Carson Beck, even though I've been very critical of him over this past year, I've been very, very critical because of all the interceptions he's thrown. But he's still a top-tier quarterback in college football and has been for the better part of his entire career at Georgia. Now, why did he go to Miami? Partially, I think it's because his girlfriend goes there. But the other half, I saw his NIL deal. He's making $4 million. That's more than some starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now, like Anthony Richardson from the Colts. So why wouldn't you want to stay one more year? Miami money, man. They got money to burn. So that's a small little announcement I'm very excited about. I was very pessimistic heading into next year. But we got a new defensive coordinator, and now we got a quarterback. I think the Hurricanes, we're going to see how it goes next year. But Carson Beck leaves Georgia and Kirby Smart, and he is heading to the University of Miami for his final year of college football. Okay, now we're going to talk about the NFL playoffs. Let's talk about the wild card. So we're going to go over a couple games, and then we're going to finish off with one specific team and game. So the Texans beat the brakes off the Chargers 32-12. The Ravens bludgeoned the Steelers 28-14. Don't let that final score fool you. This was not close. And the Bills belt the Broncos 31-7. So in the divisional round, we got the Texans heading on the road to Arrowhead to face the Chiefs, and you got the Ravens heading on the road to Buffalo to play the Bills. I'll tell you what, this is going to be the most fascinating divisional round probably in years in the NFL. I can't wait for it. But I want to talk about two teams. Well, one player and the other a team. First, let's start with the Chargers. 5th-seeded Chargers. Jim Harbaugh coming in from Michigan, trying to change the culture of the Los Angeles Chargers, who's been basically a tire fire organization for a long time. Brandon Staley's defense earlier last year, was absolutely atrocious. It was awful. It was putrid. It was just terrible. I remember when they gave up 42 points to the Raiders in the first half of that game. Yeah, once Brandon Staley got out, they went out and swung big on a head coach in Jim Harbaugh. And I know for a fact that it's going to work because the Chargers have no weapons. They have Ladd McConkey and J.K. Dobbins, who's also kind of injury prone, and an offensive line that's developing, but they have the number one defense in the NFL. Same personnel, by the way, that Brandon Staley had. So here's what I don't get, and it's the scrutiny for Justin Herbert. Now, Justin Herbert in his entire NFL career up to this point, I believe it's 5 or 6 years at this point, he's only been to the playoffs twice, and one was blowing a 31-0 lead to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now he threw 4 interceptions against the Houston Texans this past weekend in a 20-point loss to the Texans this past weekend. Everybody's calling for Justin Herbert and asking really how good of a quarterback he is and how this is defining his career. While I understand that, I will be one of the few people probably to say Justin Herbert has never been the problem. If you look around at this offense, name their best skill position player. Ladd McConkey, he came into his own, but I don't think he's necessarily a number one wide receiver. Necessarily. I think he can be. Ladd McConkey's he had 1,000 yards this year on this offense. What does that tell you? Justin Herbert is a good quarterback. And I know they have a good offensive line, which is why J.K. Dobbins was running the football a lot, why Gus Edwards was running the football a lot. Here's the problem with the Chargers. They need more weapons. They need more wide receiver and running back and tight end to help. They need more of it. You can't expect Justin Herbert to work with all of these weapons like this. Like, if you look around in the AFC, when it comes to the weapons that teams have, do the Chiefs have better weapons? Yes. The Texans? Yes. Bills? Yes. Ravens? Yes. Pittsburgh? Arguable. Broncos? I'd say yes, compared to wide receiving talent and everything. Chargers had the worst, I would say, talent level on the offensive side of the football entering the playoffs. That includes Pittsburgh. How are you going to blame Justin Herbert when Quentin Johnston, wide receiver from TCU, if there was anybody who's going to make him work, it would have been Jim Harbaugh? That dude can't catch. That dude cannot catch a cold. He was a first-round pick years ago. Always struggled with catching the football, and it looks like that's going to continue. This man just cannot catch the football. So Justin Herbert really only has one true weapon he can rely on. Well, two. J.K. Dobbins when he's healthy and 100%, and Ladd McConkey. I'm sorry, that doesn't get it done in the NFL. That doesn't. The only worst wide receiving core in the playoffs this postseason probably would have been the Ravens just because they don't have Zay Flowers. But everyone else, I would say, has a better wide receiving core than the Chargers. The Chargers, everybody questioned the pick of Joe Alt, the offensive tackle from Notre Dame, in the draft this past year. Everybody thought they were going to go Brock Bowers. I think this was the smartest decision that Harbaugh made. Realizing the asset he has as Justin Herbert and how much talent he has and how good he really is, you need someone to block that blind side for him. You need someone who can set a presence in the run game. And that's exactly what Joe Alt does for Justin Herbert, protecting his blind side and opening up so much lanes for running the football. So the Chargers, I think they're just skill position players away from making a Super Bowl run. If you look at this defense, they were ranked number 1 in the NFL with the same personnel that Brandon Staley had, and we all questioned Brandon Staley's NFL IQ pretty much. But looking at it, going forward, all the Chargers need are more weapons. And this is a weapon-heavy draft coming up this April. This is a weapons-heavy draft. Wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, even linemen, it's still pretty deep. I don't get the scrutiny of Justin Herbert because of what he's had to deal with so far up at this point in Los Angeles, but looking at it, I think the Chargers are set for a bright future. Now, I know Justin Herbert in his career up to this point, he has 2 playoff losses, no wins, and people are saying that that's going to define his career. Well, yeah, I understand that, but look at what he's had to deal with over the course of his career up to this point. This is the first year he actually has a legit head coach who knows what he's doing, who knows how to run a football team. Give it time, the Chargers are going to be Super Bowl contenders real soon. The scrutiny for Justin Herbert is just nonsense. Final thing we're going to talk about, and it's my favorite team, Pittsburgh Steelers. Don't let the 28-14 scoreboard fool you. This was a beatdown of immaculate proportions. The Ravens just pushed the Steelers around all livelong day. This was embarrassing. This was terrible. As a Steeler fan, this was one of the worst performances I've ever seen in the playoffs. This was one of the worst performances ever. The Baltimore Ravens, I'm looking at the box score right now, and this is the troubling thing. Baltimore had rushed the ball 50 times in this game for 300 yards, for 299 yards. As a team, they rushed 299 yards. Pittsburgh, as a team, had 29 rushing yards. This was a 21-0 game at halftime. This was one of the worst performances I've ever seen from an offensive standpoint and from a defensive standpoint, just because nobody seemed to want to play. Nobody seemed like they wanted to be there against Baltimore. Where was TJ Watt? Where was Cam Hayward? This was the weakest Pittsburgh team I've ever seen. And this is the most hated rival in the entire NFL. Pittsburgh, Baltimore, notorious for how much they hate each other. Notorious matchup. This one didn't live up to the hype of years past. This wasn't even close. This was a bloodbath. This was just straight up. There was no turnovers in this game. This was strictly line up. Are you more dominant than the man across from you? And Baltimore just bullied Pittsburgh for 3 hours on that football field. Russell Wilson, he played fairly well, but that was give or take better in the second half. He went 20 of 29, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Was sacked 4 times, though. Listen, as a Steeler fan, we have to start having an honest conversation about Mike Tomlin. We have to. It's the same thing year in and year out. It has been the same thing for over 10 years. We're going on 10 years without a playoff win in Pittsburgh. The last playoff win Pittsburgh has is against Alex Smith's Kansas City Chiefs, where Chris Boswell kicked 6 field goals to win. Ever since Pittsburgh lost to New England in the AFC Championship back in 2016, Pittsburgh has never been the same. Pittsburgh has not won a playoff game since then. How do you fix the Pittsburgh Steelers? Pittsburgh fans aren't going to like this. I think it's time to move off of Mike Tomlin. I'm not saying Mike Tomlin's a bad coach. As a matter of fact, he's a Hall of Fame head coach. I know that people hate using he's never had a losing record. Okay, I understand that. But our standards are Super Bowls. Our standards can't just be winning seasons anymore. Mike Tomlin does not know offense. Arthur Smith needs to get out of town. The defensive coordinator needs to get out of town. This entire coaching staff is so inept right now and so tone deaf to what Pittsburgh needs to move forward as a franchise. It's ridiculous. At this point, how do you fix the Pittsburgh Steelers? Here's what I would do. And as much as it kills me to say it because I love Mike Tomlin, I think it's just time to part ways. I'm not saying he's a bad coach, and I'm not saying it's entirely his fault. But it just comes a point in time where new scenery is needed. Just a new direction is needed. Tomlin went 5-2 his first couple years in the NFL in the playoffs. From, I believe it's 2007 to 2010, he was 5-2 in the playoffs and already a Super Bowl champion and already on the up and coming for head coaches. Then the next 10 years, he's 3-9 in the playoffs. Pittsburgh hasn't beaten an elite quarterback in the playoffs probably since Peyton Manning, or probably since Joe Flacco in the 2008 Super Bowl run. I can't think of a single MVP-level quarterback that Pittsburgh has beaten in the playoffs. Alex Smith wasn't. Matt Moore for the Dolphins sure as hell wasn't. Like, there's just so many layers to Pittsburgh's issues, and I'm about to try and solve Pittsburgh's issues right now. When it comes to head coach, here's who you depart. Here's who you get rid of if you're Pittsburgh. At least this is my opinion, and it's not, I don't get any enjoyment out of saying it, but it's time to move off some pieces. Russell Wilson, it's time to let him walk. Najee Harris, it's time to let him walk. Trade Minkah Fitzpatrick. Trade Patrick Queen. Possibly trade George Pickens. Possibly him. It's time to move on from head coach Mike Tomlin. Fire the defensive coordinator. Fire offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. Get rid of him. If I'm Pittsburgh, I'm hiring Ben Johnson as head coach. I'm getting Byron Leftwich from Tampa Bay to be offensive coordinator, and I'm hiring Robert Saleh as defensive coordinator. I'm re-signing Justin Fields, and I'm trading up in the NFL draft to get a quarterback because I don't necessarily trust Justin Fields. I saw the Dallas game. I was there in person. It did not look good. It's not like Fields was playing terrible, but he definitely wasn't playing that great early on in the NFL season. I would keep Justin Fields one more year. I would trade up in the draft. I don't care what you got to get rid of. As much as it pains me, you might have to get rid of Minka and you might have to get rid of George Pickens, but you need something new in this offense. I would draft Cam Ward. Quarterback. I would draft a quarterback. Now, necessarily, I'm just being biased because I like Cam Ward because he went to Miami, but okay, let's say they keep their first-round pick exactly where it is. You can get a quarterback in the second round, maybe a second-round quarterback, in my opinion, worthy. Jalen Milroe, even though I have issues with him, or Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. I would draft one of those two. With our first-round pick, I would, if available, I would draft Tez Johnson from Oregon, and then I would go and try and sign T. Higgins or try to trade for Garrett Wilson because I know he's unhappy in New York. That's what I would do if I'm the general manager and or owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm letting Tomlin walk. I'm letting the defensive coordinator walk. I'm letting the OC walk. I am letting Najee Harris and Russell Wilson walk. Maybe I might trade up in the NFL draft to get another quarterback like Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. I'd hire Ben Johnson at head coach, Byron Leftwich at offensive coordinator, Robert Saleh for defensive coordinator. And then from there on out, I think you can finally build around offense. We have the most expensive defense in the league. And what did that do for Pittsburgh in the playoffs? Nothing. Giving up 300 yards on the ground. Giving up over 400 yards of offense total to the Ravens. Pittsburgh was just smacked all over the field. This was a terrible performance and one that's an eye-opener. I'm not calling Mike Tomlin a bad head coach. Sometimes it's just time to move on. Sometimes it's just time to part ways. Mike Tomlin will be in the Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Fame head coach. Again, his record speaks for itself. Not his playoff record, but his record in general, his division title winnings, and the fact that he is a Super Bowl champion. Tomlin will be a Hall of Fame head coach. But it is time for Pittsburgh to part ways with Mike Tomlin and the quote-unquote Steeler way. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Again, be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. Also, be sure to follow my second channel, Renewed Hearts, with Dominic Lako. And I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend of